Hi, I'm Aaron. Welcome to Mom's Basement Streams. I am going to be playing some Yorion Fae-Blade today. Now, before we get into the league itself, let's go over the list quickly. So previously I've been on spell quellers. Turns out I was dying with them in my hand a lot. The issue being, the deck normally has a lot to do on turn 3, and so you mostly just want to do things on turn 2 and 4. And after that, sort of do sorcery speed things when you have to, but generally avoid it. So I cut the spell quellers for an extra snapcaster, some ops. This way we're on 10 cantrips, and that hopefully makes a bit of a difference. Uh, Jace is just really good here, but let's go over like the basic premise. Yorion, have to run 80 cards. Well, we're on 81 because, well, yeah, it's just kind of, you have the space. That was always an issue with Esper Farie-Blade as a whole, was that you have these two packages that you can't really cut anything from, and in the process 15 cards just stuck in a shell that's 60 cards makes it very difficult to have adequate room to do other stuff. Yorion incentivizes you to make that extra room, and that's why I'm trying it, and that's why I have a 5-0 with the list. And a bunch of 4-1s. Very, very sad 4-1s. So, in terms of individual cards, we have Paths and Fatal Pushes as removal in the main. We have 4 Teferis because he is probably the biggest incentive to be in white outside of Stoneforge. Stoneforge is another 2-drop threat, so that's really good. Teferi is, well, an anti-everything card. He just does everything. Uh, Jace is another. We have a lot of recurring value actually in this list, and that makes us very good against control and grindy matchups. And we also have a lot of tempo interaction. We have pushes, we have our cryptics, we have force negations. All in all, we have just a ton of different ways of messing with what our opponent is trying to do. Now, the reason why we're on Thought Scours is because we're on these Drown in the Locks. And Drown in the Lock is actually just one of the best reasons to be in black in the entire format. It ends up being a removal spell when you need it to be, it's a counter spell when you need it to be that, and that versatility makes it very good for lists like this, which have too many cards to necessarily function at the same degree of consistency as if you were to, say, run a 60-card deck. So every card has to do a little bit more. We're on 3 Force of Negations because it's just really helpful. I think it's better than the Quellers in this list because the Quellers just end up getting killed by bolts so often. And yeah, 3-mana negate against burn is kind of ugh. Now, with the Stoneforge package, Feast and Famine and Batterskulls, we're on 2 Batterskulls because most of the time when you get a second Batterskull online, you just can't lose. Astrolabe is actually, I think, the most important card for this list. It lets you end up running this Mystic Sanctuary package, which Faeries really hasn't been able to afford doing previously, because you had to have the right mana at all times. You needed to be able to run discard. Discard now is horrible because, well, it doesn't interact with companions. So that 1-drop spot is a lot less coveted. So we have these Mystic Sanctuaries. We're on 14 fetches. So if you're considering playing this deck in paper, know that it may be a bit cost prohibitive, unless you have the cards already. Outside of that, like, the mana is pretty stock. Look at this in card view. The Drowned Catacomb and the Glacial Fortress are concessions to the fact that red decks are very present in this format, and the saving life is very necessary. Bitter Blossom obviously is generating us tokens to make our equipment better, and Spellstutter is a flash threat that synergizes very nicely. Why no 4 snaps? Well, we're only on 22 cards that can be flashed back, and while we're very likely to find them, really overemphasizing that entire plan is a great way to sort of get huge dyssynergies between the Mystic Sanctuaries and Snapcaster Mages. Now, we have our Yorion. What are we blinking? Well, we're blinking our Astrolabes, that's the first thing. We're also blinking our Planeswalkers, because when we downtick our Teferi, it means we can't use our Teferi again. But if we flicker our Teferi, along with, say, like an Astrolabe, suddenly we have drawn a card, and our Teferi is back up to 4 loyalty. If our Teferi and our Yorion survive the next turn, we can use our Teferi to bounce our Yorion, recast our Yorion, and then do that again, netting cards every single turn in a very, very nice way. We can also flicker our Stoneforge Mystics and Snapcasters. The Stoneforge Mystic is more relevant. The one that has been just ridiculous is flickering Batterskulls. Having 2 Batterskulls in play and then just flickering them whenever the token dies has pulled me out of so many seemingly unwinnable games. So that's where the Yorion comes in, and it being an 8th card in hand when you're just kind of like, I don't have any threats, is really nice. Now on the board, figuring out what you want to do currently is difficult. So previously, our 1-drop density, as you can see here, isn't necessarily the best compared to our 2-drops. And there are matchups where we want more 1-drops, that is to say Burn, Panza, those type of decks. Fatal Push increases the 1-drop density as well as the interaction density. But also against the red-green aggro deck, we have a lot of cards we bring in. I really hate that deck. I hate Panza. Brutality is just a nice all-around card. We bring it in a number of matchups, especially against combo, where we're already pretty good, but it is a very nice addition, and we have cards that are just by necessity bad in that type of matchup. Aethergust is good against Titan decks, as well, it's just good all around. Purges, good against Jund, they're good against the red-green decks, they're good against, well, by and large, same thing as Aethergust. Timely is because game 1 against Burn is so hit or miss. Sometimes we just trounce them, other times we get the ever-loving snot kicked out of us. And so it just is clean to have these. They're also good against actually Jund and a lot of other matchups because, well, when you're exchanging 1-for-1s, why not just have a 3-for-1? It buys you so much time, and that makes it very good even when you're not playing against Burn. This is our Wrath Suite. Now you're gonna probably be like, why the hell are you on Extinction Event? Well, the answer is our creatures. See any odd cost creatures in this list? Because I'm going to tell you, there aren't any. It makes Extinction Event, by and large, better than Supreme Verdict. Verdict is still good, but Verdict is good against, like, Shadow-type decks, and Extinction Event, by and large, does the same thing, but it exiles, which means Lurris can't get those things back. Against humans, the cards that scare us most are 1- and 3-drops. I'm not super concerned about Athalia. Athalia can be blocked endlessly. Same with a Meddling Mage. But a Mantis Rider, that's a bit more taxing. It also exiles Dredge creatures, and it's just all around been great. Verdict, we still have to have one of, just because in matchups where we need a Verdict, we need specifically a Verdict. So, let us get into a league.
Alright, so this is going to be a separate piece of commentary that I'm recording because, well, these leagues tend to take a while, so having it all recorded at once is a little difficult. In a lot of matchups, you need to know what to prioritize, what you need to do. When you see red cards, the first things first, you don't give a crap about having any of the fairy elements of the deck online outside of Spellstarter Sprite. Your goal against any red deck is to jam a Stoneforge as fast as possible and start being able to interact. In this case, that's exactly what we did. We played out our Stoneforge, and that's really all we're doing, is we're just trying to get the Batterskull in line so we can protect Jace the Mind Sculptor. They are on Colossus, Hammer, Lurris. Now, this matchup is really good for us because, well, when they don't have Trample, we don't care about literally anything they're doing. Now, because they use that instant, we were able to kill their creature. Well, it sort of falls apart from here. They don't have too much in the way of answers to deal with repeated removal from being able to get back stuff with Mystic Sanctuary, which is how we're going to, well, kill their guy. And here they just concede, actually, because they understand that that's not exactly tenable. Now, this next match, I'm trying to remember what we played against, but, like, this is a ridiculously good hand, most of the time. So, let's see. We don't want to use our opt during the first turn, because, well, why? You want to use opt to look for specific cards, and we aren't looking for anything. It's not like we're looking for an extra land there, or whatever. Resolving a Teferi against any sort of Astrolabe deck is super important, because they are also likely on Teferi. Them having 2 Force of Negations was pretty rough, admittedly. I wanted to be able to have another land, so I would rather have used the opt there, because making sure we hit our land drops is more or less the most important thing in this type of matchup. They're on a, well, 4-color Yorion snow pile. And so, and here, I'm scouring them because I want a 5th land to be able to just play my sword normally and just equip and get in there that turn. Unfortunately, that wasn't exactly doable, but other hand, and so here you can kind of just cut them off at the legs, like equip the sword, get in there, use the floating mana, Cryptic Command, bounce their land with the enchantment on it so that they lose their land, or they lose an extra mana source, and we can end up killing their noble, and at that point, they're just kind of dead in the water. This type matchup is where the deck can really excel. I know I didn't sideboard correctly for this, because watching it is just embarrassing. I have no idea how I'm supposed to sideboard, because this is just a brew. I have never had to just brew a fairies list entirely from scratch. In more or less any case, because, well, normally you don't have to. A lot of the time you can have some degree of, oh, I know what I need to do with this list. And obviously we have to kill the Arbor Elf, because otherwise it's going to spiral really hard. So I opted there because I wanted to see if I could get an Astrolabe. I could not. So without the Astrolabe, well, we just resolve to just use a bunch of Thought Scours. Here, I should just run out the Bitter Blossom, but honestly, I don't know what I was doing here. It made no sense. If I had run out the Bitter Blossom, I think I would have actually ended up winning this game. And that's another issue, was I was too scared of the Force of Negations. Like, they're good and all, but, you kind of have to... This is another spot where my plays were a little questionable. I think, given the poor line I made earlier, that it was more or less correct. But I'm not saying it was... Also, that path should have totally been during my opponent's turn, and that made no sense, because I could have ended up having the push for the Ice Fang, kept the Teferi at 4 loyalty, and been able to bounce the Beast token. And if I had bounced the Beast token, had a Teferi at 1 loyalty, I would have been able to flicker it with Yorion and start pulling ahead in the game. Instead, you kind of get just stone-bladed out. Like, that's what happens the rest of this game, is that I'm just not able to deal with the recurring... because... should I put this? Yorion Snow-Blade does a lot of stuff. Just an overwhelmingly large amount of stuff. And you can't necessarily grind them out of resources. You just kind of die. The Force of Negations, I didn't feel like were that good. The issue is determining when they are and aren't that good, because a lot of decks... This one is just like a damn shame. This particular game is pretty embarrassing because, well, you're going to see. We had to mold a 5, and there are definitely some constraints there. But... Like, I also should have played that Hallowed Fountain tapped, not that it would have made too much of a difference. Just so that my island count was higher in case I did get a spell. Yeah, upon the Soul Herder... I needed to run out the Batterskull here, actually. Because I wasn't thinking about... I was thinking I had enough lands to be able to run out the Yorion afterwards, and I did not. Anyway, by the time they get a Soul Herder out, the game's more or less done. So that was a huge misplay on my part. Because it's not like anything would have blocked the Batterskull profitably, but I could have forced them to use something to block the Batterskull. Yeah. So that was just a really bad play on my part. And this was my 5th league that day, so I don't really fault myself too much for misplaying. Obviously, Astrolabe is just the default play. When you see a Tron land, it is time to run out of Stoneforge. I wanted to play the Watergrave because I want to have as many islands out at the right time as I can, so that later fetches can end up getting me things that are well, relevant. Now here's where you're going to see my opponent make a real dumb play. They took the card that mattered least. They ended up taking Drown in the Loch. And here, though, because of that misplay, we get to run out a Batterskull. They can't attack, and then we get to try equipping once. They have to kill it. We get to equip a second time, but first we want to make sure that we have the protection up for our spell stutters, for our equipped guy with a spell stutter to stop a dismember. And then we make a very large Batterskull that has a whole lot of words on it. And because they don't have, well, anything else, we can just run out a Yorion to make sure that we end up getting enough damage in on the following turn. Yeah, this match was pretty handy. Not as handy as the first. The Drown in the Lochs aren't especially great here, nor the Spell Starter sprites. And figuring out how to sideboard for this matchup has just been absolutely abysmal. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to... what I'm supposed to prioritize. Here, I felt like this was a pretty safe keep. Like, I have reasonable cards. Little did I know, my opponent actually just has a lot of Matter Shapers. And I wanted to take the damage there rather than... well, actually, I probably should have just... Alright, here we go. Boom. Smasher. Kills our Jace. I'm kind of like, ugh. But we have a whole bunch of Path to Exiles. Seems still okay. Like, okay, it's possible for us to stabilize. Here's where it all kind of goes haywire. Like, that Yorion type play is still absolutely ridiculous and can stabilize you at really low life totals. But it can also be inadequate when dealing with the Reality Smasher reality. That is to say, they just keep running out threats and threats and threats and threats and threats until you're dead. So, but here's where I started to figure out I need Brazen Borrowers. I need to have higher levels of one drop removal in the deck. Yeah, at this point I had felt actually pretty good about the matchup, and then it was just like, oh, they have the Ballista, which they could have just killed me with the Ballista from the get-go, and so in hindsight I was like a little perplexed. I'm sort of still figuring out how the hell I'm supposed to sideboard with this deck, because, well, I mostly play blue-black Faeries, or 60-card Faeries, and how you sideboard is a little more straightforward with that. Yeah, double Force of Negation, not my favorite thing in the world. But on the other hand, you kind of need it, because if they start running out Karns, or Ugins, or large Karns, or large Ugins, or an All is Dust, you can have some really big issues. This is a way, sort of, to work around that potential problem. Obviously, we have to kill the Thought-Knot Seer. Then, as expected, Cryptic Command is gone. Although, I was actually, at the time, more worried about them taking a Snapcaster Mage, just because the Snapcaster can pressure like a Karn, and Cryptic, if they're just going to continue, like that, if they're going to do something like that, Here's where we can end up starting to recover through the marvelous power of Yorion, who, if there ever were a house, Yorion is that house. We have double path on deck, and that's a pretty good spot to be in. We have a reasonable clock. They did that at the absolute worst time possible. And now they're sort of out of things to do, so a Bitter Blossom goes unanswered, and there'll be a point where they do something that doesn't really make much sense, but them blowing up Bitter Blossom there is absolutely correct, because longer Bitter Blossom goes unanswered, worse it gets, you just kind of need to kill it immediately. There's never a, I should wait about this. Yeah, this is why the Force of Negations actually turned out to be pretty good, is because a lot of the cards you care about in this matchup, I forgot about that. Yeah, that one was a little brutal. Extinction Event, we'll selectively get rid of all your odd cards. We'll do it again. Yeah, Extinction Event, kind of a house. Yep, they got the, So I didn't attack with the Stoneforge Mystic because I wanted to be able to redeploy the Battery Skull. And if you end up letting the Battery Skull die, you get to just run it out more or less for free. So yeah, D's plus. Now, I'm trying to remember what we play against here. But either way, the hand is solid. The Mystic Sanctuary is hurtful. Ah, yes. They get off to like a really fast start. There I wanted to be able to fetch a Godless Shrine, but you can't because Scalding Tarn. If there were Esper Tri-lands, this deck would be on 2, but there are not. Yeah, this hand needed a black source to be able to, well, function. And this is where, in hindsight, I realized that they were on Faeries, and, well, whoops. So, we bring in, we don't want the Force of Negations because there's not a whole ton to Force of Negation versus Lurris. I wanted a Timely because I thought it was at least reasonable in this type of matchup. they put so many cards in their graveyard that it's like, you know, actually, I can live with just doing nothing until I can play a Jace. And also, additionally, having an actual, like, hand with an adequate number of cards is so much better than having a mulligan in this type of matchup. Oof. Now, here's the point where it's kind of weird. Having the push was definitely more important than running out a Jace that might just get killed. That was a mistake on their end. At that moment, I had to look up equip rulings just to make sure that I was right about something, and I was, and it is a huge punish. Because what you can do, you still control the equipment. So, for a Sophie hit or a Jite, you still get to decide what to do with it if an opponent gains control over your guy. And that, can be a little rough. I figured it was better to gain, stupid amounts of life here, especially since they can't drown on the Locus yet. And gaining 8 off a swing is, admittedly, a little reasonable. I needed to attack first. But what you can't see here is that their Sprite Dragon has more power and toughness than our guy. And this is why Castle Vantress is super good, because even though they are doing a big hurt, we're able to start. There, I was 1 land short of being able to do what I wanted, which was bounce Batterskull and replay it. That gives us some insulation from Fatal Push. Because they only have 1 card and they haven't done anything with it for the past few turns, I figure it's safer just to start blocking and gaining a life disparity. And that's more or less what it was. When you get to the second Batterskull, it becomes very difficult to win. When you top deck another Path to Exile, it becomes exceptionally difficult for them to win. They don't actually have any Bitter Blossoms in their list, which I don't know how I feel about, because Bitter Blossom is just one of my favorite cards, regardless of how bad it is. And it's fun. It's just honest to goodness fun. Here, they kind of fall into a particular trap. That is to say, doing nothing. We can wait to do things. We aren't the aggro deck in this matchup. They have to be the aggressor. So the only thing we need to do is just make sure we hit land drops. Which we are. That's Yeah, that's it. That's all there is. Now, here, I forced them to make a decision. Because if they continued fighting over that, we were going to be able to resolve our Batterskull, and they understand that they can't do that. Because, well, we'd resolve the Batterskull, and if a Batterskull resolves, they... I'm not going to say effectively lose, but yeah, they effectively lose. This was sort of a meh. By running out a Snapcaster, we start getting some pressure going, and it's easier just to do that than, like, or it makes more sense to do that. See, when there's no Teferi involved, blue mirrors like this are actually a lot of fun, because there's a lot of dynamic gameplay that changes a lot, and even though the companions sort of make it more samey, it's not necessarily bad that there's low variance in blue mirrors. In non-modern, like in Legacy, there's like no super variance in blue mirrors. The point is that blue mirrors should have very little variance because, well, this is where they fuck up. This is where they end up screwing themselves over so hard. Because this is where we get to play a Yorion. And that just... we didn't need to see a Bitter Blossom. We sort of just took over the game at this point. But blue mirrors, in general, should have less variance. But without any really good selection in the form of Ponder or Preordain, it's... very difficult. This is one of those weird type matches. And here we have a Teferi. And this game more or less ends at this point. Like, it's not... it's not especially close. It's not especially fun. So, what happens is just this game from this point on is pretty miserable. To save everyone time, because I don't imagine you want to watch me sit and both players having a Teferi out while no actual decisions are being made outside of cantripping, I've more or less just excised that portion of the video. My apologies if you love seeing neither player do anything other than fiddle with their mind sculptors and time ravelers, but there's no actual real decisions being made, and we're both just trying to hit our land drops. And, well, he hits more land drops, and he sees a Time Raveler before I see a bounce spell for his Time Raveler. So, his Hero of Dominaria tucks my Time Raveler, and then he wins. Yep. That's it. The whole thing. It's pretty unfortunate. But on that note, there will be another video recording of another league that is definitely far more entertaining. That should be up in the near future. Remember, this is Mom's Basement Games. We love you all, and thank you for tuning in.